Hello, welcome to Ray-ality TV. I'm Raymond Bakari. Today I'm joined by Stephanie Beauté, who is running for Secretary of State in the 2022 Democratic primary. Stephanie, how are you today?
I'm doing good. How's it going?
I'm doing great, and it's great to have you on. My first question, it's a general one. Why do you want to be Rhode Island's next Secretary of State?
That's a great question. Everyone keeps asking me that. I was very much pretty hesitant to enter into the race. There's no really a political incentive for me to join, but what has reached out and has been a matter really deep to my heart is the concern about voting protection and voting rights, especially what we've seen is at stake. I don't know if you've been watching with January 6th and kind of the reviews that they've been doing and all of the measures that have gone in place that have happened behind the scenes to kind of take advantage of our government and the small overthrow that the attempted coup there. I think that all of those are a cause for concern. But one of the reasons why I entered it is looking at the folks who were running, and I was honestly waiting to see a candidate with a strong background in IT, someone who has a strong background and who understands what it means about protecting information, right? Like that is a big deal. And I didn't see that. And so at the last minute, the very last minute, I decided, you don't get to complain. You can be a part of fixing the solution and making sure that people's rights are protected in voting and that we have a system where regardless of what side of the party you are, you feel confident in the tool that you're using. And so that is why I'm running for Secretary of State.
And for quite some time, it wasn't clear who else was going to seek the Democratic nomination aside from State Rep Greg Amore. The only other two potential candidates that were named at the time when there was speculation of who's running were, I believe, Liz Tanner and former State Senator Gail Golden before she joined President Biden's administration. You mentioned it was a little bit last minute, but when did you end up making the decision to want to run?
I would say that I had a conversation with some friends and some advisors on it, and it was literally the day of the deadline to announce. And so that's when I announced, and it was like, oh wait, surprise, is this what's happening? And so that's literally when I announced. I believe it was July.
Looking at some election-related pieces of legislation, one that you raised an issue with is the part of it, I should say, is the Let Rhode Island Vote Act on your website, specifically with the purging of voter records 4 times a year. Countrywide, it's often a priority of secretaries of state to make sure the voter rolls are clean so we don't have dead people voting or incorrect addresses listed on there, even more so since mail-in voting is a norm now and people get mailed applications. What specific problems do you have when it comes to that part of the bill?
So I think that what stands out is the fact that we need to clean it 4 times a year. I think that we should be doing a lot better from an IT infrastructure system that would really update those registration lists. So if I go to file a death certificate for, my beloved family member, that information should be able to be synced in the system and provide that information to the Secretary of State office. Or when was the last time you had to go to the DMV? I think every 2 years they ask me to revamp my photo, right? And you do a change of address. And so whether you go to, the Cranston DMV or your local DMV or AAA, all of that information from an IT perspective are not really integrated and not really speaking to each other. So I think that if the systems itself, if we've done a little bit better in due diligence about updating our IT infrastructure to make sure that those records are updated, we won't need to purge, quote unquote, the voter registration list 4 times a year because it would be updated, right? We have a method in place. Someone passes away, you need the license the same way that you need your marriage license, and that's registered in the computer. That would also be registered with the Secretary of State. So that role itself would show up as no longer active. This person has been deceased as the reason, and then that would clean itself out electronically. This person has changed their address, but what if they changed it at the DMV in Cranston 6 months, but then they went to AAA and saw that they lost their ID and now they needed a new photo and they had to change their address again, right? So that information would be renewed, it would be updated, it wouldn't be a purging of the list, it would be an updating of the system. And so I think we should do a little bit more due diligence about what we're doing. And when we say that we need to clean it 4 times a year, honestly, what has happened demographically and historically are the folks who are disenfranchised, the poor folks that don't necessarily show up for the primaries, those areas that are not really targeted, but politicians show up to cultural events to save face, right? So those are people who look like me or in communities that I came from are the ones who are disenfranchised and are usually kind of the ones where legislation is written so that way they can be quietly taken out of that process. And so that is my concern.
And part of the end of that answer is something you also mentioned on the website, which is the concern of how, excuse me, this can make it harder for communities of color, people with disabilities, and those who are struggling financially. But there were legislators who lean more progressive and are people of color, such as Leonela Felix, Karen Alzate, who chairs the Black and Latino Caucus, and my rep, Anastasia Williams, who co-sponsored the bill. Is it fair to say those concerns would have been raised if that part of the bill did what you're saying it will?
Well, I think that when we see when a bill is drafted, right, is one thing, and then the intent and then how the law is interpreted is something completely different. So I'm sure that it's met with the best of intentions, right? When we have people at the when we have some people who have a seat, but at the end of the day, it's the people who have the majority of the voice that really kind of decide how these projects get implemented. And that is my concern. I think that we should be doing a lot, like I mentioned, a lot more of a due diligence in the IT infrastructure for Rhode Island, so that way folks feel confident in the tools that they're using. One of the things is, what if I am homeless, right? For whatever reason, I'm displaced, and now you've sent my voting information to the last known address that you have of me. But me being homeless, I'm not really thinking about where I'm going to vote next. I'm thinking about where I'm going to sleep. I'm thinking about where my meals are going to come from. That is kind of my day-to-day priorities, not really voting. Voting is an afterthought for me. So what are we doing in that regards and in that respect? And so those are also communities primarily of color. And when we think of our veterans, right, who suffer from mental health issues, who end up on the side of the road, who are asking for donations, et cetera, those people also have the right to vote as well. They might be kind of displaced and no longer at the VA using those services. And so now you dropped off a mail here, and once again, it's an afterthought to show up to vote. I'm more focused on making, $5 to get a sandwich at Subway, or, trying to get day to day to get through day to day. And next, an election cycle happens, and I see, these canvassing, and now I happen to remember, like, oh, I should go vote today. And then I show up and they tell me that my polling location has changed, right? So this person is also kind of disenfranchised. So I think we can do a little bit more, is what I'm asking for within the Rhode Island, the Let RI Vote Act. But I do believe that they made a great effort.
And the bill does a lot of other things too. It was a very big piece of legislation. Some of the main things it did was make the pandemic era voting practices set in stone, like not needing two witnesses and a notary for the mail-in ballots. Are you on board with the rest of the bill?
I think most of it stands out as positive in my opinion, but I always find ways that we can kind of do a little bit more due diligence and kind of improve. So I'm always looking on how we can bring about a little bit more fluidity and more clarity to whatever legislation that we draft.
Moving on to another election law in Rhode Island that gets some criticism as well, which is the state's voter ID law. What's your stance on the voter ID law?
So once again, I think that is a positive initiative, but once again, it disenfranchises folks who may not be able to afford that. I know that I can, but a lot of folks can't. And so what does that do for folks who are left out, and how do we mitigate that? And so that is a concern of mine. I think that when we look at the big picture, it sounds great, but when we're actually in the communities itself and the people that it directly impacts, that's kind of where we're missing out. And I think that we can do a better job. But in my opinion, I don't think that that would be the best outcome for everyone.
What would be alternatives to that then? Because I know, for example, in Rhode Island, it's not as restrictive in other states. If you don't have your ID on you, you could fill out a provisional ballot, and then they'll confirm that you are who you are. And also, there's the argument that the IDs are affordable to get in Rhode Island too, and that we don't that the law in this state doesn't intend to disenfranchise those in those groups, and hasn't statistically. What would be an alternative?
Well, when we say hasn't statistically, how are we really targeting data of folks that go in to get an ID, and then everyone is able to kind of get one? Or are we also targeting for the folks who go to get an ID, they find out the cost, and they have to turn away because they can't meet whatever that fee is? Are we targeting that?
Well, you also need an ID too to cash a payroll check, to get cigarettes, to see an R-rated movie, pretty much every aspect of life, even to drive.
But not a special ID to get you to vote, correct?
Well, I could just pull up my state ID at the polls. I've had my ID since 16 years old, and it was very cheap.
And that's why I think that why do we need to create a special ID for voting, the voting ID?
A state ID, that's a normal ID. Anybody can get that.
No, no, no. I think, take a step back. We were talking about the voting ID,
The
correct?
voter ID law where you need to show photo identification in order to cast your vote.
That is correct. Sorry, I misspoke.
No worries.
So with that being said, with the voting ID, I agree that that makes sense to have your ID to identify who you are. But what happens in other cases where you are missing your license? And I understand that we can also kind of cross-reference, but I did actually have a situation where my ID did not have the updated address. It had my last address on it. And so that itself became a problem for when I wanted to cast a vote and I had to do a provisional ballot. And then later on, it wasn't counted because they said that my ballot was supposed to be casted in Bristol versus in Newport, which is where I was residing at the time. And so to rephrase, I think that an ID is great to have. What are other ways and other measures that we need to confirm that this is a person, this is in fact that person? There are always other methods, right? Some folks carry their social security card on them. Some people are a little bit even more thorough with that if they have like a light or electricity bill. And then one thing that I personally think of is what if we have authentication where it can kind of verify who you are as a person. One thing that I have as a thought is for folks who kind of are comfortable using their mobile app. I don't know when the last time you used Grubhub or whether you used Uber to get in your car, right? You were comfortable putting your banking information in there, being able to make a payment, do all of those things. What if you were able to also cast your vote on your phone? What if voting was that easily and accessible? If you chose to opt in. So that is a choice, right? And then another thought that I also have in terms of making it easier for folks to vote, for folks who are not comfortable with that, what if you had an update on your phone that literally told you when your polling place has changed or where your next polling place is? Rather than waiting for a letter in the mail, you got a notification the same way that someone gets an Amber Alert on their phone from the state, right? That literally says, hey, your polling place is closed. However, here's your new polling station. Don't forget such and such time. Or maybe even a reminder to say, here are the items that you would need to make it very easy. And based on your language preference that you opted in, it would go in Spanish, in Haitian Creole, in Cape Verdean Criolla, whatever language that you speak. Primarily, you would have that text notification that would pretty much give you insight as to where you're supposed to be. So I think that making it easily accessible, and for folks who are not as tech savvy, like my mom, absolutely not, she hates it, but still kind of uses a smartphone or a smart device, having a guidance tool to tell her of what the expectations would be or what that's going to look like, whether it's an email to say, here's what the day is going to look like. We're projecting long lines, right? Here's the best time to come, to give you a notification. If 3:15 might be a shorter time or 11 a.m. might be a best time, to kind of give them, a heads up for folks who work 2 jobs. Hey, maybe you might want to do a mail-in ballot, or here's a better time to go to this spot to cast your vote. So I think that we can be a little bit more pragmatic with the resources and the skill sets that we have in the current day and age to move voting to a place where it's accessible for all. And I understand that folks are a big fan of paper, paper, paper. And so whatever you've decided to vote for, you had a confirmation of this is what you received. And then the Secretary of State's office or the Department of Elections will also have a record that would stand of here is, this person, they casted their vote, et cetera, et cetera. And that data would just be pulled on the back end.
I'm glad you mentioned the idea of remote voting because that was actually the next topic I had written down here.
Really?
Yeah, so I'm glad, but no worries. I'm glad you mentioned it because I was actually going to ask that next. And the alert system, that's an interesting idea, but specifically focusing on the voting remotely, I do want to ask because when there was a bill that passed to have remote voting for military and disabled voters this past session at the GA, it got concerns from top election officials because of security concerns. You can't hack a paper ballot. And plus, we already have no excuse mail ballots, ballot harvesting that's legal, and 2 weeks of in-person voting. Are there any security concerns that you're concerned about when it comes to remote voting?
So when you say you can't hack a paper ballot, paper can burn. Things can be destroyed in time, but things that are stored in the cloud are kind of like accessible anywhere. I guess what my concern here is, I think that if we had a little bit more technical folks in the room to discuss what the tech stack would look like, what the system architecture would be, what are the guardrails that would be in place, people would feel a lot more comfortable talking about something that they feel a little bit more familiar with folks who have expertise in that space. So I think that that would probably persuade folks rather than dissuade folks in this regard.
So
And
to,
sorry, go ahead. No, no worries.
I was going to ask, so before fully implementing it, you would make sure the security is in place so we don't have any elections hacked if people vote remotely?
Of course. I mean, our banks do it all the time. If that were the case, you know, your bank account would be set at zero any given day. So, I mean, our traditional banks are able to do it. A lot of businesses do it. Everyone who goes to a job that uses a computer, they have security in place to make sure that there's data integrity. So this is not something far-fetched. This is not something that's like so hard or arduous to really, you know, wrap your mind around. I just think that if we have a good group of technical people in that space to explain the system structure and how we're going to go about it and provide as much insight to folks who are non-technical, which I do all the time. It's literally my day-to-day job, but like provide enough information and insight on how we're going to build something like that. I think people would feel a lot more comfortable and confident because we use security in our day-to-day every day. You know, Citizens Bank isn't having a security data breach, nor is Bank of America doing one, and everyone goes banking, right? So
well, Wells Fargo did not too long ago.
Well, that is true, but that is an opportunity to learn, right? So those are when these things happen, the tech community literally figures out what happened. We all share information. That intel is important, and then that's how we build stronger systems. There are such thing as ethical hackers whose job it is to actually hack the system and find weak points in order to make sure that our systems are secure.
I'm just curious, and I'm glad you brought this up because this is an interesting dialogue, and this is the first time I've heard this when talking about elections, and I appreciate you going into detail with this. So, in terms of the possibility of hacking, so and you said you know, making sure that we have the tech is secure and that people are constantly evolving our technology too, so we don't get hacked every election cycle. I'm just curious. So, say for example, we have a governor's race, right, where one candidate won, but it turns out that it was compromised and there was remote votes that were compromised that made the difference. Would that result be reversed?
Well, it would. So whenever something would get compromised, there would be some type of alert that would be sent out, probably to the DevOps team via PagerDuty. So you'd get some kind of notification that something has happened, right? That would show when the breach took place and where that breach was. And so if we know what the change is in that, and it reflects that in a governor race, in this governor race, right, we have 4 great candidates that are running. However, the election was compromised due to a cyber threat took place, and that once we looked at it, we saw that it was in fact in favor of one of the other candidates. One of the things that I think that we should be able to do is to be transparent with folks. People like honesty. They like to know that we're trying to fix things and update things. Hiding things makes people weary. I think people are already a little bit uneasy with the government. And so showing people our the flaws in something and showing them that we've mitigated those risks and all of the steps that we've taken to put into place to make sure that these things do not happen only ensures more voter confidence. I think that the more work that we do to hide these things and not be transparent with the public, or not even showing up our auditing records of how we're kind of making sure that systems are maintained and updated, giving that type of information to the public, not necessarily sharing the tech stack that we use to kind of make sure that it's safe, right? But making sure that the public is aware of the work that we do behind the scenes to ensure data integrity only protects our elections along the way. So I like to err on the side of caution of, you know, we are proactive, not reactive. So I'm doing all of the work ahead of time, not a few months before an election season. I'm looking at the tools that I'm using 2 years in advance to prepare us for that very big day, to make sure that we have a successful outcome of an election result. And I think that that's kind of the item that I'm focused on. So reactionary would be to wait for something bad to happen and then try to fix it, right? But I'm very into the proactive. What are the things that we need to look at? What are some things that are outdated, right? How can we make sure that the public is confident when they go in to use this tool? Here's how is the best practice. Here's not what you don't want, your son voting for you. You're voting on your own. Can we confirm all of these measures? And that way we can have a successful outcome when it comes to voting.
And the office itself doesn't focus on only elections. It also focuses on the state's businesses, helping our small businesses and those who want to start a business. I believe it was in a Boston Globe article, you expressed concerns about Rhode Island ranking 45th out of 50 on CNBC's best states for business. In part, that low ranking could be attributed to all the red tape put up in regulations. How can Rhode Island improve its ranking?
When I look at places like Boston, they're known as the best place to build a startup, right? People go to the West Coast, to Cali, to Seattle to build those startups. Why can't they do that here? I think we have amazing, great talent. Rhode Island is known as one of those great creative spaces, right, for intellect to thrive and be successful. But I think that we're making it so hard for people to, one, start a small business, two, maintain a small business because the loans almost feel like shark loans that they're getting. And then three, providing resources to help folks who may not necessarily be the best when it comes to money management. You may have some businesses that have been around for 24 years, and so they kind of know who are the people that they need to speak to, what are the paperwork that they need to have in place, how to make sure that everything that they do is aligned. And then you've got someone who's new on the block with just a great idea, has some money and some backing, but needs some support and needs some resources. And I don't think that we're doing enough to provide guidance in that area. I don't think we're doing enough to support, to make sure that small businesses are open. One of the things that I heard of that was disappointing to me while on the campaign trail is for folks who have had a business in Newport for a number of years, the amount of red tape it took for them to get a license, they're technically operating without a license because of how hard it is. But the state doesn't know that, right? So I'm not gonna call the business out, but the state doesn't know that. But the type of work and effort it took, and they still had to go through their councilman after me talking to them about what is available to them in order to have an appointment to make this happen, is ridiculous to me. I don't think that that makes sense at all. And so what is Massachusetts doing to get people to have tech startups, right? What are they doing that we can't do? And we're such a small state. So there shouldn't be all of this red tape. I think that we're just doing ourselves, we're disenfranchising ourselves. And when we think about it, Rhode Island's economy is based on the success of small businesses. So it seems to me like a no-brainer that we would want to support and make sure small businesses thrive. We want to make sure communities are thriving. This, in fact, reduces the wealth gap that we keep talking about, right? When small businesses succeed, Rhode Island succeeds. Everyone succeeds. Your community succeeds. My community succeeds. The neighborhood grows. The population thrives. We see less crime. We see less death. We see it's just a positive. I don't see why this is such a challenge. And from my background with working in bigger companies where processes exist, I have been able to kind of talk to stakeholders and discuss how processes slow down processes in order for us to have more skillful release cycles, to be able to have a quicker way to have a response to things where we're trying to get out, a software release to a customer. So red tape doesn't help anyone. I think it just makes it more expensive and just provides an excuse for us to have more legislatures to get paid off of state funding.
I think this is one of the few issues I've heard members from the left and the right actually agree on. So it's certainly one that I would assume the next Secretary of State will have on the top of their list of priorities. Another one, too, which is another big component of the office, is promoting civic and education and leadership. Secretary Gorbea was very active in promoting those two things. It's also one of your priorities too. Legislatively, there was a bill signed into law last year requiring students to demonstrate proficiency in civics education before graduating high school. And as you indicated on your website, there's definitely room for more to be done in this area. In what ways can civic education in our state be further improved?
That's a very great question. So one of the things that I think of was a value piece to me was internships. I did an internship at my high school, Hope High School, which I'm proud of, and I hated it. I literally wanted to be a neurosurgeon. I spent a lot of time filing, and I honestly thought that neurosurgeons saw patients for like a few minutes and they spent the rest of their day filing. And that to me was a deterrent, right? But with civics education, I think having the students be a part of the dialogue, being able to go to the state house, see how laws are passed, how they're built, right? How things are drafted, being able to meet with their councilmen, councilwomen, really being engaged in that space and not just like letter fillers. I don't think that that's fair. I think that really being involved in the process and understanding it and not promoting what party you should be in. I think that that is super critical, right? We're not deciding, we're not raising people to be a specific party. We're having them understand how laws are passed within their communities and how to be engaged in that regard. And one of the things that I think that the law could do further is it doesn't really identify like how we do that. It's so general, right? They just must demonstrate some form of civic competence. What does that mean? Most folks graduate and they don't really know what that means. Like, okay, well, I passed this test, or I got my friend to help me pass this test. Now I'm done. We check off the box. I don't think that that's good enough. I think we can do a little bit more. One of the things that I would like to propose is that when you're 16 years of age and you're in high school, we pre-register you to vote. So when you're 18 and you graduate, you're already registered to vote. So you're pre-registered in the system, regardless of your school district, right? Every high school has that. I mentioned the internship as being something that's of value. I want to partner with teachers. I do not believe in the whole top-down approach where you just draft a bill and you tell people go do it. I think we should actually talk to our teachers, folks who have been doing it well. How does it work for them, and what are the creative ways that they've been using to really engage with their students? And for the other teachers that are finding it as a struggle, who might have limited funding and resources, what are we doing to support them to be able to meet this metric, right? We have all of these great legislative initiatives, but not enough follow through on how we intend to deliver that for our people. Because truly the folks that are not going to be as well informed are the folks who are not as don't feel like they have an incentive to vote and to participate because they don't understand it. They don't feel like their vote in fact counts. They don't feel like their vote matters or changes something. So I think having students really be in those spaces, and not just in election cycle, but really be in those spaces to be a part of that conversation and say, well, why are you drafting this bill? I think that that also will hold a lot of our politicians accountable. Can you imagine like a 13-year-old saying, well, I don't think my mom would like this. That doesn't work well for how me and my mom live. I think it provides, that sense of consciousness to that politician to be like, oh, well, maybe I should, have a second thought here rather than what the backroom dealings go on in the state house, in my opinion. But I think that that provides a little bit more honesty, a lot more transparency, which I think would be great, and actually make civic engagement come to life where it actually makes sense to someone. You never know, you might be making the next future president out of Rhode Island by having a really great program.
You never know, and it's certainly an important topic. Imagine being able to go into the General Assembly and talk to your legislator. That could be a life-changing experience. I think that's definitely something that the next Secretary of State could further improve when it comes to civics education. I know one thing that is going on, and this is one I like to ask every candidate seeking the office, is about the Civics Leadership Award, which goes great on high school students' resumes. It certainly helped mine in 2019. It's an award that's awarded to 2 high school juniors every year in every high school in the state. And this award is for those who make outstanding contributions to their community or demonstrate proficiency in civics education. Civic engagement. Getting all these E's education engagement mixed up. Would you keep this award going if elected?
Absolutely. Everyone likes to feel like the hard work that they put in comes with a merit and value. And so why not celebrate our young students, and why not honor the hard work and the effort that they put in? I think that that is always a great idea, to have an incentive-based reward system where people really feel empowered to achieve something even more so, and to go out and be recognized amongst the community of your peers. But that is an amazing feeling. Absolutely.
Looking at an election reform that's gaining steam across the country that I want to get your take on, which is ranked choice voting. I believe it's currently being done in Alaska, Maine, and then major cities like New York City. And it's definitely an interesting proposal. There's pros and cons to it that I've heard, and it's something that I'm starting to see more legislators be open to and those seeking office. Where do you stand on ranked choice voting?
I think it makes sense. If the person that you wanted as a first choice is no longer available and your second choice is available, I think that that's kind of the common sense approach, that it would go there instead of us just trashing a vote, throwing away a vote. It just seems like a more practical, pragmatic solution that folks can kind of just rank out who they would like.
My final two questions are non-political topics to take a step away from the politics. My first one is, do you have any hobbies?
Do I have any hobbies? I have tons of hobbies. One include traveling. I'm a big fan of culture and learning a lot about different cultures. And then the next is yoga.
Nice. Is there any interesting place in particular that you traveled to?
I did a stint where I went around the world, literally traveled the world on a plane in 30 days, and that was really cool. So I got to see a lot of different countries in that time space. But I have been privileged to be able to see the many diverse cultures, whether it's watching a show in Argentina and seeing tango come to life with, my little one, my daughter who loves to dance, or being able to volunteer in Havana, Cuba, and see the people there and go out with friends who are doctors and really just be a part of one, embracing the culture and respecting the culture, but being one to give back in that space. That is something that's near and dear to my heart. Been from France and to Italy. I think the way that I can make sauce from scratch, it rivals any person on Federal Hill. I'll challenge them to that because I have the authentic ingredient there. So yeah.
I'm half Italian, so I have to try that. If we ever do an interview in person one of these days, moving forward, I definitely would look forward to that. My final question. This is
Yeah, so definitely.
my final question is one that I like to ask everyone on the show to keep the tradition. It's my favorite one to ask. In your opinion, what do you think Rhode Island is best known for?
I think Rhode Island is best known for the culture that we have, the just the spew of richness in our diversity, whether it's the Bolivian culture, Guatemalan, Colombian, Indian, Native Indians, like it's just so known for its culture, and the fact that you can get so many different types of food is just a beautiful thing to see in such a very, very small state.
That's very true. I agree with you wholeheartedly on that, especially in Providence. Aside from Federal, I mean, even Federal Hill, I mean, it used to be a lot of Italian restaurants, but it's really changing up and it opens up a lot of perspectives for residents. And I agree with you on that. That's a great thing that we're known for. I also like to say that it's one of the best things Providence is known for too, especially because we have a lot of great communities too. It's very diverse and does a lot of great things for our state.
I think having one of those diverse communities brings out the best in us in Rhode Island, whether it is the Liberian, Nigerian community, Ethiopian community, and then you've got, the folks who are from Poland, and, you've got your Greeks and your Portuguese, just all blending in one space, living in harmony and truly just loving on each other. I think that that is one of the things that makes Rhode Island such a special place.
Exactly. Couldn't have been said better. Stephanie, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure of mine to have you on.
Ditto, thank you so much for having me. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. And thank you for watching this episode of Ray-ality TV. If you want to see future episodes as soon as they're posted on this channel, please click the subscribe button down below and the post notification bell icon to the right of it. I'm Raymond Bakari, and I'll see you on the next episode.